Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we'll take a look at how the Khalistan campaign is being internationalised, particularly after the recent conference in Azerbaijan. We'll take a look through a summary document now being distributed globally, setting out the case for a sovereign Sikh homeland. We'll also take a look at recent analysis from the community of the continuing disjoint between Canadian politicians and their own security and law enforcement services, who have, of course, been telling the politicians the uncomfortable truth for years. Narendra Modi visited Punjab yesterday with his ears probably still ringing after the Sikh Assembly Speaker sent a warning letter to him about his willful neglect of the state. And we'll discuss how a few brave Sikh voices are now raising up more vocally against an Indian state intent on burying them. And an update on two British hate crimes charges finally filed. More on that in a moment. All this and more on today's show, and of course at the end of the show we'll take a look at loads of your great comments which have poured in beneath the videos last week, so thank you as always for those. Right, let's get underway. And yes, today's show we're going to talk about there was a hate crime, or a couple of hate crimes actually, in recent times here in the UK, and I'm delighted to report that at last the police, the police go through their sort of process in their own plodding way, if you excuse the pun, and they have finally caught up, hopefully, with the perpetrators. If you may recall, there were two taxi drivers who were assaulted in the Midlands here in the UK. It was a relatively low-level crime in the sense it wasn't. We've had actually worse crimes since, including two awful rapes, for example. But these two crimes were relatively low-level. It was a couple of young thugs who basically took on a couple of elderly taxi drivers, Sikh taxi drivers, and ripped off the turbans and assaulted them outside the train station in one of our Midlands towns, and it was very symbolic. I say it was obviously traumatic for those involved in it, but it was also it was a wider trauma to the community because it was a very visible, very symbolic attack on the community, a community that has integrated so well here in the UK, and it of course does point to the wider issue of uncontrolled immigration, which is generating so much hatred and hate crimes amongst the wider population. Even people who really almost didn't even have an opinion many years ago have sort of evolved and been pushed into this sort of right-wing, it's not even extremist, it's become a mainstream sort of feeling now, that uncontrolled immigration has generated anger, hatred, and that hatred is turning against our integrated ethnic minorities here in the UK. And unfortunately, our Sikh community here in the UK, this is reflected right across the diaspora now, where uncontrolled immigration has become an issue, and that includes North America and Europe, and indeed down under, actually, of course. It is turning, I would say, ordinary, normally decent, civilized people into people who are now taking out their anger on our ethnic minorities, perfectly innocent people who have been integrated for, actually in many cases, generations. So it's a deeply tragic situation that's been generated by outside events. And so this is why this incident is very symbolic of this rising hatred, this rising hate crimes against our Sikh community, amongst other ethnic communities. Anyway, I'm delighted to say that the local police have finally charged two gentlemen. Oh, I wouldn't even call them gentlemen, two thugs. Actually, no, let's correct myself. Innocent until proven guilty. I mustn't fall into that trap. Two men have been charged. The assault actually took place in August last year, and there was a viral video that went round of the assault. Now, the two guys are named as Zachary Hall, 20 years old, so a young lad, and as a young local lad, he's been charged with GBH, which is grievous bodily harm, a racially aggravated public order offence, and 3 further public order offences. And another lad, Nathan Edwards, of 25 years old, also local, charged with the same offences. Oh, an actual bodily harm. That means he actually hurt one of the poor victims. The key element there is that they were charged, or at least one of them was specifically charged with a racially aggravated public order offence. So in other words, this wasn't just an assault, it was actually a hate crime and will be logged as such. And this is why it's really important, wherever you are in the diaspora, that these crimes are logged actually as hate crimes, because then they go onto a database as a hate crime, and therefore, as I've often said, regular viewers of the show will understand why this is so important, in that these statistics, hate crime statistics, are then collated at a wider national level, feed up to the politicians who can then create policy to deal with it. If they don't know it's a hate crime, it can't be dealt with as such. So anyway, the local police. Now, this is important, actually. I'm going to talk about a few comments that have sort of flown across social media about this story. And it just reflects a lot of the feeling out in the diaspora about this, not just this issue, but issues like this and very similar issues. And again, it's very relevant to North America, to other diaspora locations where hate crimes are on the rise. The police themselves said, look, we understand this incident did cause a lot of concern and, of course, trauma to the community. A thorough investigation has taken place. 3 men have now been charged. 3 men have now been charged in connection with it. Of course, there's actually another lad, an 18-year-old, a guy called Leon Willits, in addition. So 3 guys been charged with this. But they say it's vital that the judicial process is allowed to continue without interference and that nothing is said or published which could prejudice the ongoing court proceedings. Now, that is an important statement, and this is a message to the community, and this is the frustration of the community, because the community, and again, I'm going to look at the 2 rape cases that happened recently. The 2 Sikh ladies were raped that were clearly hate crimes. And of course, and again, this goes to the grooming gangs, and this is where there's this sort of awful, it's almost a grey area between the binary issues of the police on one side is the only law enforcement allowed, and on the other side we have society at large, which has to rely entirely on law enforcement to enact the law. We cannot be vigilantes. We must rely on the law enforcement agents to enact the law. That's the binary position, the black and white position. In theory. In practice, that is not the case, because unfortunately, it has, particularly with the grooming gang scandal, and the story in Canada is another example, where there is a feeling that the authorities and the states and their agents, in the form of the police, intelligence agencies, are not protecting us, are not protecting particularly our Sikh community as much as they should. Therefore, the Sikh community feels they have no choice but to defend themselves. How often have I sat in this seat and said, the Sikh community is being forced to defend itself because it is not being defended by our state bodies that have this responsibility to do that. So again, and this is an appeal by the police, look, please don't take the law into your own hands, because if you do, or if you start saying stuff on social media, etc., you'll prejudice the case. We cannot allow this. Society breaks down if we all just revert to vigilantism. And again, it's great in theory. We mustn't revert to vigilantism. Otherwise, society ultimately becomes anarchic. It becomes an anarchy. We don't want that. But the onus is on the police. You've got to prove to society, you've got to prove, particularly to the Sikh community, that you are doing the job. And again, I'm looking at, for example, Canada, the Canadian politicians primarily, and I'll talk about this in a moment in another story. But we all look to our authorities, whether it's the police, whether it's intelligence agencies, whether it is the politicians. We look to you to protect us. If you fail in that responsibility, we have no choice but to take the law into our own hands to protect ourselves. That's the reality. So, anyway, as I said, the police have issued that statement saying, please, look, just let us do our job. Don't get involved, and we will bring about justice. Now, Devinderjit Singh, the lead exec at the Sikh Federation, he made a public statement after this, said, we're pleased the 3 men have been charged. I'd like to thank British Transport Police for their investigation and local MPs for keeping up pressure. So it was actually, this is a whole chain of pressure. The pressure has come from the Sikh community on the police and likewise the politicians. In fact, essentially the Sikh community have also pressured the politicians. Grassroots activism works. I send that message out on a daily basis. Keep campaigning, keep being active, it works. So the pressure on the politicians in turn force the politicians to pressure the police, do your job, we need a result quickly. And here we go, finally we got that. So Devinderjit continues, given the 3 men were arrested on the spot for the horrific attack, and there was video evidence that went viral, and the fact that the attack was witnessed by loads of people, there was huge frustration. It's taken more than 5 months, for the Crown Prosecution Service to be satisfied before laying charges. There was a clear racist element to the attack on the two elderly Sikh men, and we note one of the three has been charged with a racially aggravated public order offence. So even Debinderjit, who's normally extremely diplomatic in all his language, makes the very clear case, look, it's taken 5 months. Why has it taken 5 months to bring these guys to justice when it was pretty damn obvious from the videos? I mean, the viral videos were so damning. It was absolutely clear cut. There was no investigation really needed apart from knocking on those three lads' doors and saying, "Is this you? We know it's you. You're under arrest." I mean, surely it doesn't take more than that. But anyway, I'm not a policeman. But ultimately, you can sense the frustration. Now, I just wanted to. On social media, there were a lot of comments right across all the platforms about this story here in the UK. And this reflects, again, this isn't specific to the UK. This reflects, I would say, a deepening frustration of the community globally against our global authority bodies like the police, politicians, etc. For example, one comment, and this is from a guy called Michael Jones. I mean, to me, he sounds like a white lad. What's the full address of these lads? Now, the implication of that is pretty clear. We want to know who these lads were, what's their addresses, so we can basically go around and enact our vigilante justice. And you can sense the anger because, again, when anybody from our own communities, our own families are attacked in any manner, our immediate knee-jerk reaction is we want revenge. We want to go out there and revenge. And as put one of our commenters a while ago, Sikhs are the greatest revengers. Absolutely. Don't upset a Sikh, and God help you if you do. But ultimately, yes, there is this sense amongst not even the Sikh community. This guy, I think, is a white guy. He said, let's go get these guys, you know. But then Cal Candola, and this shows a big word, dichotomy. This shows the two schools of thought, let's call it, in reaction to this. On the one hand, we've got Michael Jones, which probably represents a very large part of all our communities, saying, let's go get it. Let's go get these lads. They're guilty. You know, let's dish out a bit of our own justice. But on the other side, you've got Cal Candola, who says, look, they are only young. Education and awareness, that's all they need. And there's a laughing emoji after that, because is that a naive comment? I don't know. You let me know in the comments. What do you think? Is it naive to say, look, these young lads, idiots, basically, if they were educated about who Sikhs are, about what they represent, about the contribution they make to our society, about how integrated, that these guys see themselves as British. The Sikhs that they attacked, probably, I don't know, but I'm presuming, they see themselves as British as the young lads who attacked them. That's the irony. In other words, it only takes a bit of education. And I agree with a large part of that comment. And part of the reason why I sit here is we need to educate a wider audience about Sikhs, what they represent, who they are, what good they bring to our society, etc. Because in that way, hate crimes will just start to vanish. It's not rocket science, but ultimately. So, but in this case, unfortunately, because there was a violent, thuggish element, maybe there is an element of naivety here. Anyway, but and actually, I don't know if this guy's a Sikh. Jitinder Barrier. Don't target their families. Don't spread hate. Do support the victims in any way possible, please. If they need numbers at court, anyone arranges support, please keep it peaceful. I will happily attend. Now, this is the key comment to me. This is, look, remember the whole concept of Sikhi. It is, yeah, it's all about, we will always protect the oppressed, we will stand up to injustice, etc. But do not spread hate. Treat our fellow human beings with equality, dignity, etc. Try to understand. Support victims of violence, of oppression, etc. Support them. Channel your energy into supporting those who are targeted, but don't become vigilantes. That we are a peaceful people, and it's a common sense comment. I think it's based in the whole religious sort of element of Sikhi, in that we are not a violent people. We are not aggressors. However, cross us, and by God help you, we will stand up for ourselves and stand up for anybody who is oppressed. But as a people, as a community, we are not a violent community. We are not an aggressive community. We are not aggressors. We don't go out there and commit violence. That is not who we are. Even even in revenge, really, and that's the element that becomes a little bit of that grey area that I'm talking about. And again, I'm curious about you in our audience. What is your opinion in this situation? Do you think we need to be more vigilante in our actions of revenge? Do we rely on law enforcement? But we are a peaceful people. Anyway, there you go. So, as I say, those comments I think were quite indicative, and that opens up a whole sort of debate about what do we do in these situations. Do we wait 5 months for justice to do its thing? Justice delayed, justice denied. Or do we need to take more direct action? The Grooming Gang scandal, prime example of this, ultimately encapsulates this whole issue again, where vigilante action on behalf of the Sikh community particularly has delivered results because the police have failed. In other words, vigilantism, is it justified in that case? Again, it's a huge debate. So anyway, let's move on. A lot to get through this morning. There was that very wonderful conference that was held. It must be, it was about 10 days ago in Azerbaijan. It was a Khalistan conference. It was a conference that was hosted by a group called the Baku Initiative Group. And it's this group is a non-governmental organisation. It stands up for, as it says, union, liberty, independence, and it's an activist organisation based in Azerbaijan. And the Khalistan campaign were essentially invited to this conference to educate, explain what the whole Khalistan movement was about. And it was in front of global cameras, lots of people invited there from academia, from politics, from all sorts of walks of life and society. And the goal essentially was to educate and disseminate the whole concept of Khalistan to a global audience, to explain what it's all about and to justify why the global community should align and support the Khalistan movement. So again, I think it's been branded a very successful conference, as I covered it at the time. There were a lot of representatives from the Sikh community, and of course the Khalistan campaign were very well represented at that conference. And as a result of that conference, they have produced a booklet. It was about a 16 or 17 page booklet called The Khalistan Movement. Here we go, this is the front page, and it is published by the Baku Initiative Group. Now, as I said, this international think tank, as it's called, has been known in the past, and its sort of track record is to platform ideas for progress on geopolitical conflicts, which is basically a big word saying it will always help promote concepts that it aligns with, that it agrees with, that the world community should be aware of. And so it did issue this very extremely good document, I have to say. And it came after this very successful conference in which a lot of people from the community stood up, delivered great speeches, powerful speeches. As I say, it was in front of global cameras. Now, I just want to quickly flick through this document just to give you a clue. It's about 16 or 17 pages, so I won't go into it in detail, but I just want to give you a flavour. And bear in mind, as I go through this is what the world community, who know nothing, many of whom will know nothing about Punjab, never mind Khalistan, certainly won't know anything about the Khalistan movement. And even the term Khalistan might be a completely new concept to many of the people who read this document. So again, it's designed to be very simplistic. It obviously leaves out a lot of detail, but it's designed just to be a snapshot to a reader. This is what Khalistan is. This is the history supporting the concept, and this is where we are today. So it does, unsurprisingly, go through a lot of the history, a lot of the background, and a lot of the context, the origins and early history of Sikhism, all the way back to Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And it goes back, of course, it gives a snapshot of the history, including the Sikh Empire, the 1799 Sikh Empire, the multi-ethnic, important key words there, multi-ethnic, not just Sikhs, the multi-ethnic Sikh Empire, Lahore as its capital in 1799, and of course the great Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji established it. Then talked about the Anglo-Sikh Wars, which ultimately the British Empire arrives on the scene and annexes poor Sikh Empire. Apologies on behalf of, why am I apologizing? I wasn't there. Anyway, so yes, of course, the annexation of Sikh Empire in 1849. So, and then it skips forward to the dreadful events of 1947, the partition. There's when basically genocides again happened, and up to 1 million Sikhs were massacred amongst millions of other ethnicities who suffered terribly as that massive diaspora movement, that massive exodus of people into East Pakistan, West Pakistan, Punjab sitting there in the middle as essentially the sort of the middle battleground as people moved. Oh yes, it actually says that approximately 1 million people were killed, millions were displaced. So it does actually acknowledge the fact that 1 million people, I mean, try and get your head around that. But anyway, again, you imagine the impact as a reader, who, again, many people won't even know about partition, have probably never even heard of it. Global readers of this will think, gosh, really, I didn't know that. 1 million people killed in this one simple act. And then it goes on sort of to explain sort of the following years what happened. But then it goes again. It fast forwards to the 1970s, and again we talk a lot about the events of the 1970s. It talks about the rise of the Shiromani Akali Dal, and it goes into the sort of a bit of the background politics and how the Sikh community got involved in politics through the Shiromani Akali Dal. But it does, of course, then uses this word escalation, Operation Blue Star. And again, I don't need to talk in too much detail about Blue Star that we do talk regularly about. And it does actually say, during the 1947 partition, approximately 250,000 Sikhs were killed and more than 2 million displaced. So it does again highlight the fact of, and I think this is an understatement, of how many Sikhs were actually killed. But it says here, one of the contributing factors to rising tensions in the early 80s was the perception among many Sikhs that although the community had achieved considerable economic progress, unsurprisingly, their political demands were not fully reflected within the existing administrative framework. In other words, that's a very long-winded way of saying that basically they're being ignored and they have no voice. So it then goes through the background to Operation Blue Star, the terrible events of Blue Star, and then what followed. And then it doesn't actually interestingly mention the Sikh genocide, which I find is a huge thing missing from this document. And there are a few things missing from this document that if I drafted, I certainly would have put in. But as far as I can, as a quick read through, I can't see any mention of one of the key traumatic events, Galugara events of the Sikh recent history of the 20th century, the genocide. Where's mentioned the genocide? Anyway, it does talk about the, and again, key areas here. 1987, of course, post the Sabak Khalsa of 1986, where the word Khalistan really hit the sort of the mainstream. But it does say, on October the 7th, 1987, a political organisation, the Khalistan Council, based in Washington, D.C., declared the establishment of the Independent Republic of Khalistan. Persecutions by the Indian authorities against members of the Sikh community intensified once again, and thus it then talks about the post-militant period. Then it skips through the 1980s and 1990s again, where I think it mentions like tens of thousands of Sikhs were killed. Actually, I think that, again, that's an understatement. So it does seem to downplay a lot of the genocides here. And then post-militant period, the role of the diaspora, and again, interestingly, and this pays tribute actually to the efforts of the campaigners, the activists in the diaspora right across the world, as the diaspora sort of grew, certainly post-1980s and 90s, after many literally fled for their lives. And it talks about the contribution of the diaspora. And then it fast forwards to the issues of Hardeep Singh Nijjar being murdered, the attack on, or the potential assassination of Gurpratap Singh Pannoon, etc., etc. And then a little section of global Sikh protests, and it's just picked one, the recent one on Christmas Eve, organised by Sikhs for Justice. And again, it rather downplays, I think, a lot of the massive campaigning and activism that is prevalent all around the diaspora. It gives a quick rundown of the key major Sikh organisations worldwide. At the top of the list, it talks about Sikhs for Justice, World Sikh Organisation, Sikh Federation UK, Sikh Youth Federation, Sikh Coalition, etc., etc. Khalsa Aid even gets a mention there. And then prominent Sikh leaders all the way from Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, of course, they're the key historic figures. But then contemporary leaders, this is interesting. Hardeep Singh Nijjar gets a mention. The late Hardeep Singh Nijjar, Gurpratap Singh Pannoon, some names we recognise there. Maninder Singh, who spoke very articulately, very passionately at this very event and is a regular appearer on the media. Shamsha Singh, I met Shamsha myself. I had the honour of meeting Shamsha, was it last year? here in the UK from the National Sikh Youth Federation. Dabinderjit Singh, a friend of the show. So Jas Singh there. So there's lots of names that even I recognise and have had the privilege of either talking to or meeting myself. And then within the context of the United Nations, it talks about how it sits potentially and how the United Nations have now taken notice of the Khalistan movement, which is a very, very important thing. And then other platforms discussing the Sikh issue. Then it just runs through Canada, United States, and then various human rights organisations which have picked up the story. So it's a very, very short, condensed document. I mean, if we all sat down together, we could probably write 300 pages of everything that justifiably could be in a document like this. So we have to sort of forgive the document in the sense it's had to sort of condense a huge history and a huge justification for the Khalistan movement into this very short document. My only disappointment with this document, there's no section about the geopolitical benefits to the world of Khalistan. There's no actual, and I think this is a massive thing missing. Maybe there must be reasons why it's not there. But a glaring omission in this document is why isn't a whole no big section or even a small section just to explain why Khalistan, the existence of Khalistan would be so critically important into maintaining world peace. For many aspects, certainly separating India, Pakistan in their never-ending conflict, the issue of having a peaceful, democratic nation sitting in that key strategic region, sitting alongside China, etc. There's so much that could have gone into that whole element as well. It's not even mentioned in this, which I think is a glaring omission and a deep disappointment. But anyway, not my responsibility, but I'm just highlighting that fact. So there you go. But what it does think, and the one positive, amongst many positive things about this is a document that is spreading the good word around the world. And don't forget, this document will be seen by journalists, politicians, academics, the movers and shakers all around the world. So again, it's a very important document, this. And again, it educates and brings more people into alignment with the whole concept of Khalistan. That is why it's so important. So anyway, there you go. So it's good to see that. And as I say, that conference in Azerbaijan, I think, has had a very, very positive resonance around the world, which is great to see. Let's move on, and I'm going to revisit a story that I talked a lot about in recent times in Canada. Of course, we have a huge diaspora community in Canada, and one of the rumbling on stories that just will not die in Canada is this continuing disjoint between the politicians and the law enforcement agencies in the form of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the CSIS, the intelligence agencies, etc. And again, it's actually not just specific to Canada. I talk regularly about this in the UK, and I think to some degree in Australia, New Zealand, to a lesser extent, I think in the United States. Europe, I think, is again to a slightly lesser extent, but certainly very glaringly obvious in Canada is this terrible disjoint where the politicians say one thing, but their supporting law enforcement agencies and their intelligence agencies are saying something completely different. And the community itself know who is speaking the truth. And surprise, surprise, it tends not to be the politicians. Now, amongst lots and lots of media interest in this whole story, Baz News have talked about this, unsurprisingly, and they wrote just a couple of days ago. They wrote again another interesting analysis to look at this. And I just want to quickly just summarise what was said in this document, but also just to highlight some of the key elements again that this whole issue is highlighting. And this report again, it talks about recent events in Canada. Particularly focuses on things like the extortion rackets that have been, again, generated from Indian gangs. And the report highlights a disturbing trend where Sikh politicians in the diaspora particularly, and this is again, and I've talked about politicians, and of course, by implication, we're all immediately jumping to the conclusion it's white politicians. It's not just white politicians, it's also Sikh politicians. Sikh politicians are likewise failing in their responsibility, and this again is a big point being highlighted in this report. It is this trend where Sikh politicians across the diaspora, not just in Canada, despite being aware of the intimidation and extortion facing their own community, are refusing to explicitly name the Indian state as the orchestrator. So even our own Sikh representatives are not naming India as the perpetrators. And it's exposing how these politicians are always sticking to party-approved scripts. They're always towing the party line that prioritise diplomatic relations and trade deals over the safety and sovereign rights of the Sikh community. Again, it's always dollars against human rights. And even the Sikh politicians are falling on the wrong side of that. These guys should know better. If they are practising Sikhs, they should know better. And Baz argues in their article that many Sikh leaders have mistaken proximity to power, as it calls, and there's closeness to power within Western political parties for actual community power, leading to this situation where they're more accountable to their parties than to their community, to the Panth. In other words, they care more about aligning with the party than actually representing the Sikh community that they are supposed, both morally and democratically, supposed to stand up for. And the investigation connects this recent huge wave of extortion and threats against Sikh activists, particularly, and of course Khalistan activists, and it links it directly to Indian intelligence operations. And they frame it as a coordinated effort to silence the Khalistan movement across the diaspora. We know this, we talk about this regularly. And this term they use is Extortion Theatre. The term refers to the performative nature of political responses. And when I say performative nature, that basically means it's almost like they're on stage. They're performing to their audience. You know, they're almost like actors on a stage. So this extortion theatre is all about this performative nature of political responses that acknowledge foreign interference in sort of very general, generic terms, but carefully avoiding specifically mentioning India's consulate intelligence nexus, as Baz calls it. In other words, basically, India's involvement, India's intelligence agencies behind it. And the story concludes that the Sikh diaspora must move away from its reliance on mainstream political structures, which are often compromised by Indian lobbying. Of course, they're infiltrated or manipulated by Hindutva forces and this massively financially resourced Hindutva movement who are clearly influencing our politicians right across the diaspora. And instead, the community needs to build independent, self-sustaining institutions to protect its interests and advance the cause of Sikh sovereignty. As I'm sort of saying that, I'm also immediately springing to mind Punjab. Same issue in Punjab. Hindutva is infiltrating, obviously, the political organisations in the Punjab, Sikh political organisations like the SGPC, the Shirmani Akali Dal. The same thing's happening in the diaspora. Exactly the same thing, where even our Sikh politicians are essentially being turned by Hindutva to act on behalf of Hindutva rather than the Sikh community. So this article, in summary, it pulls back this curtain on a pretty scary reality in Canada, and not just in Canada, I think it's across the diaspora. While Sikh families in the community are facing all these threats and these drive-by shootings, these extortion attempts, and people demanding protection money, many of our own Sikh politicians are just staying quiet. And the report says these politicians are following a script. So instead of calling out the Indian government for being behind the violence, they're using vague words like foreign interference. I mean, it's so general, it's so vague, it could literally mean anything. They seem more worried about staying in favour with their political parties than protecting the people who voted for them. And they've basically traded real community power for a seat at a table where they aren't even allowed to speak the truth. In other words, they have a powerful position representing their community, but they've exchanged that to sit alongside fellow politicians amongst which they can't even tell the truth. And we have to look at how much things have changed in just over a year. Back in September 2023, Justin Trudeau, did something extraordinarily brave. He stood up in the Canadian Parliament and he told the world, to his own political detriment, that there was, quote, credible evidence that agents of the Indian government murdered Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. He chose Canadian sovereignty and Sikh lives over keeping India happy. But contrast that now with what's happening with Mark Carney. Powerful voices in politics following a globalist line, yes, of course, the old WEF, World Economic Forum line, seem to think that trade and business with India are more important than human rights. To them, India is a huge market. They don't want to rock the boat. And this is sending, of course, a dangerous message that the safety of Sikh Canadians can be traded away for a better business deal. And compare that similarly to the UK, where likewise the safety of British Sikhs can be traded away for a better business deal. And the most terrifying part of all this is how it's happening across the diaspora. Canada's own intelligence agency, the CSIS and the RCMP, have warned that the Indian government is likely using local gangs to do their dirty work. Instead of using spies in suits, they're using gangsters to harass, to extort, and even kill members of the Sikh community who speak up for Khalistan. And these gangs are being used as hired help to make Canada feel unsafe for all of us, for all of you guys in Canada, and likewise in the UK. And even though police and intelligence are warning about this link to India, politicians are still towing the line. They are still refusing to acknowledge it. They're still acting like it's just a normal gang problem. It's a normal criminal problem, instead of what it really is, a foreign government attacking Canadians. So the bottom line is, the Baz News report and the current situation in Canada tell us one thing, that the Sikh community is being treated basically like, you can call it sitting ducks. When politicians choose trade deals over the lives of their own citizens, they're failing at their most basic job. We can't wait for someone else to save us. The Sikh community cannot wait for politicians to save you guys. And as I said before, you need to build your own strength in the community. Demand that leaders stop following a script written by others. It's time to name the perpetrator publicly. It's time that the politicians actually had the balls, frankly, to say who is behind these attacks. And say, like Justin Trudeau had the courage to do, that it is India, and demand genuine safety for the Sikh diaspora. And sadly, our politicians, whether here in the UK, whether it's in Canada, and to some degree in New Zealand and Australia, and to a lesser, lesser extent in America, US, United States, politicians are failing in that simple responsibility. So there you go. Let's move on, and let's jump across to the Punjab. Let me take a swig of chai. And Narendra Modi yesterday visited Punjab. I'm sure he was made very welcome. Not. And it turns out, just a couple of days prior to to yesterday's visit, the Speaker of the Assembly, a guy called Kultar Singh Sandwan, wrote a letter to Prime Minister Modi, and quite a powerful letter. And his letter framed particularly, and he focused particularly on the continued detention of the Bandi Singhs. And he called it a violation of natural justice. So the Speaker, a Sikh gentleman, actually wrote and made very clear to Narendra Modi, it is a violation of justice that the Bandi Singhs are still in prison. And he highlighted the fact that these are individuals who've already served their legally mandated sentences, often spanning 25 to 30 years, yet are still in prison due to the Indian state's refusal to grant them release. And of course, these Singhs particularly are political prisoners because, of course, their arrest dates back to the 1980s and 1990s. Well, they call it an insurgency, but essentially this self-defensive acts of the militants in the 1980s and 1990s. So the Indian state labels them as terrorists. He highlighted the fact that the Sikh community views them as political prisoners of conscience. Now, under Indian law, life imprisonment usually allows for the release after 14 to 20 years, based on their conduct. If they're good, if they behave themselves, they're usually released early. But for these Sikh prisoners, they keep changing the goalposts. And essentially, they are in a permanent state of extrajudicial punishment that is just bypassing the standard legal system. So, the Speaker's letter isn't just about prisoners. It's basically, and the fact that he made this public, and this is important, his letter was made public, and it highlights to a wider audience that it's an indictment of India's failing federal structure. He highlighted how Punjab, once the breadbasket of India, is facing a manufactured economic crisis. So he's actually openly accusing the Indian government of deliberately manufacturing an economic crisis in Punjab. Because, for example, he says the central government is withholding billions in rural development funds. Now, to anybody outside India, this might look like a bit of a budget dispute, but it's not. In the context of Punjab, but as I often talk about, it's a deliberate weaponisation of state financing. By withholding funds meant for example, agricultural infrastructure and rural jobs, the Indian state is actually seen as punishing the Sikh majority state for its history of dissent. And of course, refer that in the context of the massive farmers' protests of 2020, 2021, in fact, and also in 2023-4. And this, what he calls fiscal autonomy crisis, is a core argument for Khalistan. The belief that Punjab can never prosper as long as its purse strings are controlled by an enemy in Delhi, a hostile central authority in Delhi. Now, a significant portion of his letter addresses the unjust diversion of Punjab's river waters to other states, which has actually led to a catastrophic drop in groundwater levels. And I've talked a lot about the water issue in the Punjab. It is a decades-long flashpoint. And despite the whole principles of riparian rights, the rights to your own river water, India has forcibly diverted Punjab's water to non-riparian Hindu-majority states like Rajasthan or Haryana. So in other words, it's not just an environmental issue, it's an existential threat to the Sikh farming community, to the Sikh agricultural industry. So his demand, the Speaker's demand for control over Punjab's own headworks, is a direct challenge to the central government's, what he calls, neo-colonial grip. That's a really powerful phrase. And this is important because, again, it goes back to what we said all the time, is that Punjab essentially is colonially controlled by the Brahmins, by the Brahmanical elite of India. As he said, it is central government's neo-colonial grip on the state's most precious natural resource. Again, fueling the demand for sovereignty. And he urged the Prime Minister to officially rename Adampur Airport after Guru Ravidas Ji. Now, Guru Ravidas Ji, he wasn't one of the 10 Sikh gurus, but he was a highly revered 14th century saint whose teachings against the caste system and also for equality are central, and he forms part of the Sikh faith. And I think a lot of his writings actually form part of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, although he's not actually named as one of the 10 Sikh gurus. But he also speaks to a great extent about the Dalit community as well. But anyway, so the Speaker is demanding that the airport is renamed after Guru Ravidas Ji. This is a significant thing because it might seem sort of trivial to outsiders, but in India's current political climate, it's all about this battle for identity. While the Hindutva government is busy renaming cities to erase, for example, Islamic and minority history, the Sikh community is asserting its own spiritual and revolutionary heritage. And the demand to rename the airport serves to unite different segments of Punjabi society against a central government that often uses its divide and rule tactic to create friction between different religious and caste groups within the state. So again, it's a bit of a fight back against that control from Delhi. And Kultar Singh Sandwan himself, he stands at the forefront of this battle as the Punjab Assembly Speaker. He carries a heavy historical legacy as the grandnephew of Giani Zail Singh, the former President of India, who had a complex and often strained relationship with the central government during the 1980s. Now, Sandwan himself has proven he's not just a symbolic figurehead. He's actually consistently, as I understand, used his platform to challenge the BJP-led centre. He famously stood against the 2015 Bayadbi incidents in Faridkot, one of the few leaders to actually join the victims' families in their pursuit of justice. And by recently petitioning Modi for the release of the Bandi Singhs and demanding the return of Punjab's diverted water and withheld funds, he's effectively telling the RSS-led government that Punjab will not be financially or spiritually strangled. His stance represents a significant bridge between grassroots activism and the legislature, the assembly. So he is an important, not just a symbolic figurehead, but an actual genuine activist. And this battle for the soul of Punjab is currently being fought between two very different visions of the future. On one side, we have the powerful Indian state driven by Hindutva RSS ideology and, of course, the governing BJP. But on the other is a community of Sikhs who refuse to let their identity be erased, standing firm for the concept of Khalistan, or at the very least a Punjab that has at least some level of autonomy. And for the RSS, the goal is simple but very dangerous. They want to turn India into their Hindu Rashtra. And the ideology known as Hindutva often tries to claim that Sikhs are just a branch of Hinduism. Of course it's not. But by doing this, they're trying to swallow the unique Sikh identity into a larger Hindu fold. And Sikhs stand up and say, no, look, we're not. We're not Hindus. We are a separate nation with our own language, our own history, our own culture. But the government labels them as anti-national or terrorists. And it's a typical tactic to scare people. And it justifies taking away the rights of Sikhs in the Punjab. Most recent example, this fierce resistance to Delhi in the form of Amritpal Singh. And despite his massive popularity, shown by his record-breaking victory in the Lok Sabha elections last year, or 2024 now, the Indian state views him as a major threat. He rose to prominence by speaking out against, for example, the drug pandemic, the epidemic, the rising tide of Hindu nationalism. He openly promoted the idea of Khalistan as the only way for Sikhs to be truly free. And because his message resonated with so many young people who felt betrayed by the Delhi government, the state used the National Security Act to arrest him. They weaponised the law to send him to prison thousands of miles away in Assam. And to many, he's not a criminal, but a simple political prisoner, punished simply because he was brave enough to stand up and fight openly against this oppressive system. And history has shown us over and over again, you can cage a person, but you cannot cage an ideology. And I've said this before, you can't kill an ideology. The concept of a Khalistan referendum, a simple democratic vote to see what the people actually want in Punjab, is something the Indian government is terrified of. If the government truly believed that the people of Punjab wanted to remain under the current system, they would allow a vote to happen. Their refusal to hold a referendum is a sign of weakness. They realise that if given a free and fair choice, the people of Punjab would likely choose autonomy and sovereignty. They're afraid because they know in a true democracy, the will of the people always wins. The people always win in the end, that's what I always say. So the struggle we see today is part of a long history of Sikh resistance against those who seek to dominate them. Whether it's the Mughals, the British, it doesn't matter. It's now against the Hindutva forces. The Sikh spirit just remains defiant. History proves that while a powerful state may use force and fear in the short term, the people always win in the end. Democracy isn't just about voting every few years, it's about the right to self-determination. Punjab's resistance today is a reminder that the fire of freedom can't be put out by jail cells. It can't be put out by these waves of propaganda, the Godi media. The people's voice will eventually be heard. And when it is, this theatre of state control will finally come to an end, and we will see, finally, the establishment of Khalistan. It's coming, whether they like it or not. Simple as that. So on that note, let's move on to our comments column. Thank you to our wonderful audience for your loads of wonderful comments. And I'm going to start with a controversial comment. This was after the show I did, the editorial I did on the grooming gang story. That's had a lot of views. It's a very, very popular video. Unsurprisingly, it's resonated with a lot of people. This grooming scandal is huge, really. And the Sikh community has become such an important target for the Sikh community to do something about it. And we've talked about vigilantism in the show already. Basically, the Sikh community have had no choice but to protect their own. Now, this first comment comes from somebody calling themselves Michael Bradbury, which one assumes then is a white guy. He says, would white people get the same credit? No, they get arrested. We don't need Sikh interference. We just have to take action. Sikhs don't belong here either. Brown on brown they leave alone. Whites doing the same means white convictions. Tell me I'm wrong. Okay, picking apart this comment. It's quite an important comment, this. Basically, if I understand this comment correctly, he's saying, look, Sikhs are protecting their own. Fine. You get credit for it. You know, the media say, this is wonderful. Well done to the Sikh community. And everybody's patting themselves on the back. But when white people do it, they get arrested for vigilantism. And I think that's a valid point, actually, Michael Bradbury. I think I can sense your anger and frustration. Say, look, when we do it in the white community, the police arrest us. Why aren't they arresting Sikhs for doing it? And I think that is maybe a valid discussion point. Absolutely. Ultimately, don't forget, actually, we're all on the same side. All of us are pretty much united in wanting to get these awful, evil people off our streets and into prison. We're all united on that, whether you're a Sikh, whether you're a white guy called Michael Bradbury. We are aligned. Don't forget that. Don't turn on each other. We're all fighting the same enemy. And the point I don't like in here, which I do totally disagree with, Sikhs don't belong here either. I mean, that's a stupid thing to say. Apart from the fact it's racist, it's a silly thing to say because many Sikhs in this country are second generation, third generation. They are, as whether you like it or not, they are as British as you or I. They see themselves as British. They will gladly stand up in front of the Union Jack, the British flag, and fight for it. Probably more so than you would, to be fair to our Sikh community. So don't say they don't belong here. That's a completely idiotic thing to say. And it's apart from the fact it's offensive, it's just deeply wrong. But ultimately, when we talk about Khalistan, don't forget, you, Michael Bradbury, should support the concept of Khalistan, because once Khalistan is established, many Sikhs in our community will, like happened with Israel and the Jews, many Sikhs around the diaspora will relocate gladly and happily back to Khalistan, their homeland. So support Khalistan. If you don't think Sikhs belong here, support Khalistan and many will leave. Anyway, a silly comment. That part was a silly comment. But thank you anyway, Michael Bradbury, if you're watching, for your comment. Now, I love this comment. I had to put this. What a comment. Joshua MacDonald, a British Sikh should run for London Mayor. Now, this is very UK-centric politics. But for those outside the UK, we have a mayor that's elected every few years to run London, our capital city. At the moment, we have a Muslim, a guy called Sadiq Khan, who has been accused and blamed of all sorts of failures. He strongly represents the Muslim community and seems to sort of forget about everybody else. He's clearly being accused of hiding Muslim grooming gangs in London that have been that are enacting their evil ways in London. He's burying the fact because, of course, he's a Muslim. So he's a very, very controversial figure. London crime is rising through the roof. London is becoming I have to say, a pretty awful city and a scary city under Khan's tutelage. But this is why, and of course, lots of people from different political parties, and Sadiq Khan, the mayor, is a Labour representative. He represents Starmer's government, effectively, the same party. So the Conservative, the opposition say, we need a Conservative mayor. And people say, no, we need a Greens mayor, an environmentalist mayor, etc., etc. This is the perfect solution, Joshua MacDonald. Why has nobody thought about this? A British Sikh should stand for London mayor. I think this is the most beautiful, most diplomatic, perfect solution. Everybody would and should vote for a Sikh. A Sikh would run London for the benefit of all. Under Sikhi principles, I could talk for 10 minutes about this, I mustn't, we're running out of time. But this is just the best suggestion I've seen for London Mayor of any suggestion. If you're in London, or in the Midlands, push this idea of British Sikh. We need to find a suitable British Sikh. Dabindajit Singh, there you go, there's one. I'm gonna email Dabindajit. You'd be perfect for it. Anyway, going down a rabbit hole on that one. But thank you, Joshua MacDonald, for your brilliant suggestion. I love that. This is a criticism. When we talked about the birth of Khalistan in one of last week's shows, we talked about activism, campaigning, etc. And Gary S. has completely missed the point. So, supporting terror in the G7 is common to use it against India when required. I think, I'm trying to interpret this comment, basically I think this comment, Gary, is trying to say that we're promoting the idea of militant terrorism to attack India, to push for the concept of Khalistan after the Sabak Khalsa. So what I think this is when we talked about the Sabak Khalsa, which of course followed. What followed after is those terrible events of the 1980s and 1990s, the militant uprising in defence, self-defence, after hundreds of thousands of Sikhs were murdered extrajudicially. So what Gary is interpreting, and clearly Gary doesn't understand what actually happened in the 1980s and 1990s, doesn't understand what the Khalistan movement is doing now and its democratic, peaceful movement now, and comes out with, I have to say, a bit of a silly comment. So silly comment of the day goes to Gary S8452. We're not supporting terror. I mean, in what you show me anywhere, quote back to me if you're watching, quote back to me anywhere where Sikhs anywhere around the world are campaigning for Khalistan through acts of terror. Show me the evidence, please. I'd love to see it. Now, everybody has got the message. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet. Narinderjit Singh Saini. Hi, Narinderjit, one of our regulars. Sikhs suffer every day in India on false charges. It's very hard to live freely in Punjab. So what's the answer? Thank you to Mastan Singh Dulai. Hap B, stay safe. Many of our regulars, we're all there. We're all singing in a glorious chorus of joyful euphoria for Khalistan. The solution is Khalistan. Hap B says, India's been at war against the Sikhs. Sikhs now know they have to stand up for Khalistan before it's too late. Stay safe. Of course, there's only one solution for a Sikh nation. Thank you to each and every one of you, amongst many. We're now, all of us, singing, as I say, in a wonderful choir of sovereignty, of Sikh sovereignty. The only solution is Khalistan. That is the only answer to all these problems we talk about on a daily basis. Mr. Singh, and I just realised I made a massive screw up on Mr. Singh's comment. There was another comment, a really good comment you made, and I can't actually remember what it was. And I copy and pasted the wrong bit twice. So apologies for the duplication. Carney and Ebby being the Premier of British Columbia. Carney and Ebby are only focusing on business deals. They don't care about Sikhs. Before you vote for any politician, including Sikhs in Canada, think 100 times. Refer back to my story about even Sikh politicians in Canada now are failing in their responsibility to represent their own community. So your vote is deeply powerful, Mr. Singh, as you rightly point out. Use it wisely. You only get one chance to vote at each election, so use that vote very wisely and very carefully. Bobby Singh, though, warns Mark Carney. It's all very well towing the World Economic Forum globalist line, but you're going to get probably betrayed by the RSS, and you're going to learn your lesson. I think you're absolutely right there, Bobby Singh. TC, I love this suggestion. Maybe we should get Starmer on the show for a question and answer session. You wouldn't need the Sikh report to counsel him on a few things. Khalistan's in demand. Now, the only problem I've got, TC, with getting Starmer on the show, anybody who's watched our British Prime Minister being interviewed, he's a Dalek. He talks about working people in a very nasal way, and he just talks and talks and says absolutely nothing in lots and lots of words. And you can ask him a question, and you will, at the end of his answer, think, what did he just say? He said absolutely nothing. He's a useless Prime Minister. He's a useless politician. Interviewing him is a complete and utter waste of oxygen. You will achieve nothing. TC, you must know that by now. So sadly, I wouldn't want Starmer gracing my studio. Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you for the suggestion. Right, and the last section. I love these comments. Sikh warrior. I love this comment. I do hope I've interpreted this right. English-speaking warrior in the Sikh army. And I do hope you're referring to me on this. Maybe it's a bit presumptuous of me, but I think hopefully you're referring to me as being an English-speaking warrior in the Sikh army. It is an honour and a privilege to join the ranks of the Sikh army. I will stand there in absolute utter pride to stand alongside, as indeed my grandfather in Burma in the Second World War. fought in northeast India, in the same area as the Sikh regiments were fighting as well. And it would be an honour for me likewise to stand even in the same battlefield as the Sikh army. I would say that as a massive, massive honour. I'm certainly not afraid of standing up for all those that the Sikh army fight against. Mr. Singh does come back. Many thanks to you for your contributions in the Khalistan Freedom Forces. Again, I have joined the ranks of the Khalistan Freedom Forces, and once again, as I say, it's an absolute honour. Thank you for being on the front line. I don't know if I dare be on the front line. I might be a few rows back. I'll let you brave guys be on the front line, but I'll do my bit. Your efforts are not going in vain. I certainly hope not. But ultimately, all our efforts are not in vain. All I am is a conduit for the truth. All I am is basically a messenger. I am here but to channel the truth, channel the stories out to you guys. It's you guys, really, that are the front line. It is you guys that are, really, the vanguard, the forces, the army, the Khalistan Freedom Forces. It's you guys out there that are really fighting that battle on the ground. All of you, every single one of us, has a contribution. We're all only single voices alone, but combined we are an army. We are this massive Khalistan Freedom Force that is fighting for Khalistan. This is why it's going to happen, because all of us are now getting involved. Tell more people, educate more people about the concept of Khalistan. As I said before on the show, many people have not even heard of the idea, but more and more people now have heard of it. More and more people are understanding what Khalistan is, what good it could be for the world. As Mangal Singh says, Khalistan Zindabad, and an awfully long row of biceps. Gurmeet Singh and Gurjant Singh both sign us off today. Khalistan Zindabad, absolutely. Indeed, we all know what we're fighting for. We know it's coming. All you need to do, as one of our commenters said the other day, is hop on board the Khalistan train. It is leaving the station. Don't get left behind. So that is it for another day. Don't forget you can message me at message@satlushtv.com. Let me know, as many of you have done. Thank you for all your emails. Thank you to those of you who sent me links, really interesting links. Much appreciated. And TC, a message specifically for TC. I don't know if you got my emails back, but they keep bouncing back. So I can't help you on that one, but thank you for your emails. But that's it. Do let me know your thoughts. Let me know your perspectives. Let me know if you want to criticise or correct me on anything. I do love the negative comments as much as I love the positive comments. But ultimately, we are a united force fighting for one single concept, that of Khalistan. So that's it for another day. Thanks so much for joining me. God willing, I will see you next time.